Today I want to talk about something that I've talked about quite a bit on this channel, and I think it's really interesting because we saw recently with the Red Note, or Xiaohongshu, which is Little Red Book, that the American people and the Chinese people are actually not that different. And so I want to talk about it because I've talked about this in the past, and I find it interesting because it was like a giant social experiment with, about 1 million plus Americans who joined the app, and then all the Chinese people that use that app interacting. And it was really interesting. I'm a little late to this trend, to this thing that happened, this social experiment, because I wanted to see kind of if it was sustainable, and also just because, wanted to get my thoughts together before I said anything. And what I noticed and what I found really interesting was what I've been saying for such a long time is true. And I've been telling Chinese people, because I lived in China for 14 years, they would always ask about the United States. And I always told them that, the United States has a lot of potential, but in its current trajectory, it's not doing well. The people are suffering, the government is not working for the people, and because of that, they end up with a lot of problems. The United States, there's gun violence, there's drug abuse and overuse, there's medical issues in terms of like medical bills and how the whole healthcare system is set up in the United States. And I would talk about all these social problems that exist in the United States. And Chinese people were always polite and then, interesting. And, a lot of them would just believe that I was a bitter, American who had left my home country, and I was unhappy with my home country. And they would always kind of politely be like, okay, interesting, assuming that I was telling a big story in order to, justify my living in China, right? Because when you live in your own country, you always see your own country very differently. And so Chinese people that I talk to, some of them would talk about how they wish that things were different in their country, which is perfectly normal. Especially young people would talk more about like freedom of expression and freedom of speech and things like that. Things that they admired about the United States. And I would always counter with, well, it's great, but it has its drawbacks, and that is if everybody can say whatever they want whenever they want, it can lead to all kinds of chaos in terms of fake news and in terms of misinformation and just a lot of problems. And great, you can express yourself and you can have the freedom to criticize your government, but that doesn't actually change anything. You have people online constantly criticizing the American government, but it hasn't changed anything. People have been complaining about the gun laws for years and years, since I was a kid. When the first big shooting in Columbine happened, people were calling for, and I think that was 99, 98, when it was like a real big, like, whoa, this is a thing, that kind of wake up moment for the United States. So we're talking, like 25, 30 years, people have been trying to change that, and it just won't change because of the lobbying that is done by the NRA. And so I would talk about, well, freedom of speech is fine, and it's good if it can actually bring about real change. But the problem is, in the United States, is people just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and nothing changes. And so Chinese people will always, when I got in political conversations with them talking about China or talking about the United States, a lot of them, I think, and know, is that they kind of were just like, oh, okay, it's your perspective on the United States, and it can't be that bad. And I talk about homeless problems and stuff like that, and they're like, yeah, it can't be that bad, right? And with this migration of, million plus Americans onto their app, which is, basically a closed garden app, it's a Chinese app, and almost everybody on there is Chinese. It's designed for the Chinese. It's a Chinese app. And so when all the Americans came on and started talking about their social problems, I think it was a big wake up for a lot of Chinese people, because it's easy to idealize the other, right? the grass is always greener on the other side until you see the grass. And in America's case, the grass is littered with homeless people to some extent. And so I think it was a little bit interesting to see those interactions, because a lot of Chinese people were like, oh, it really is as bad as, some of the Americans that are living in China talk about. And that was pretty eye-opening. And so that's really interesting to me from a social experiment, because they could actually see it. And on the other side, I've been on this channel, and for many years, whenever I'd go back to the United States, I would sing the praises of how great life is in China. And I would always be laughed at, be like, how could a communist country be good? Everybody in China's poor, everybody is a mess, and, they don't have any freedoms, yada, yada, yada. All the stuff that the propaganda media feeds Americans about China specifically, but just about other countries in general. The United States media is basically saying the United States is the best country in the world and everywhere else is pretty bad. And it's a little less bad in our ally states. But America's the best, and there's no reason to even leave America, because there's no reason to leave the United States, because you don't need to go see for yourself. We'll tell you how bad it is. And so on this channel, and whenever I'd travel home and people would be like, oh, where have you been? And I'd be like, I've been living in China. And they'd just be like completely blown away that, one, I'd want to live in a country like that. And then two, that what I was telling them was not lining up with what they've been told by the mainstream media. And, it's always the people that will say the mainstream media is lying to us, until it's a topic that they believe, and then the mainstream media must be true. Oh, we'll believe the narrative on China because it aligns with our worldview, but we won't believe the narrative of the mainstream media when it is about something like our own government. And it's just a funny way that people justify their worldviews. And so I would always say, go to China and see for yourself if you don't believe me. And most of them can't. A million Americans from the United States can't just get up and go to China and see for themselves. So this app, Red Note, allowed them to actually interact with real Chinese people, because it's a real app for Chinese in China. And there's no reason for these people to lie, because they're just sharing, like if any other app like Instagram or TikTok or something like that, they're sharing their life, right? They're showing their kids, they're showing their apartments, they're showing their cities, they're going to some new restaurant and vlogging about it. And Americans were allowed to see that because they joined the app, and they say, well, what is all this stuff? This is not the China that I believe existed, because this isn't what I was told. And they believe what they were told, specifically on things that align with their worldview. So the idea that China is a poor, backwards country is, they like that, right? Because if China's poor and backwards, then it means their government is failing the people, and therefore we can't learn anything from that. So they just make toys and junk to send to America, and China's this wasteland. But when they actually started to see the cities, and they started to see the things that I've been telling them for years, it's a bit of a mind shift, because they're like, wait, who's actually lying to us? And when they realize it's actually the American media has been lying to them, they have to readjust to the reality that China is something completely different than they believed, and it's not as poor and backwards as they thought. And I think that was really, kind of a watershed moment for a lot of the people that actually did join and actually did watch the videos, because it forces you to reflect on what you believe. It forces you to reflect on Chinese people as a people, not as a government, not as a this enemy, this mythical land where they're out to get Americans. Because one thing that I noticed with this experiment is, one thing that I've been preaching forever, is that Chinese people from other countries are just like you. They're just like me. They want a better life for themselves and their family, right? They want a good education, they want health care, they want nice things like nice apartments and nice cars, and they want their government to function to provide them with those things. And when you take away the governments and you have people-to-people exchange like we saw on the app, all of a sudden you start to realize that Chinese people are just people. And this is, what I've been saying. And that might sound crazy, but the way American media often works is they try to segregate things and try to other things. Like, Chinese and China and the Chinese people and the Chinese government is bad. It's all bad. Mexicans and South Americans who are trying to come into the United States, it's all bad. And truth be told, many of those people that are migrating to the United States are just trying to get a better life. And it's no different than, any other suburban mom and dad who are struggling with money and struggling with life, and they want a better life. And when you actually have that people-to-people exchange and you take away all the noise, all the distractions, and you actually see it, you realize that we're the same, right? Chinese people were talking about how to take care of their families, right? Americans were asking like, my kid's sick, and do you guys have any good remedies for helping with a cold, because I don't have money to go, to the doctor, and I don't think it's serious enough, but my kid's sick. And then Chinese people were like, I use hot water and ginger and many different recipes that people were coming up with and saying this helps when my kid is sick. And then you start to see what has been always the other this is just another person who's dealing with the same things that I'm dealing with. What to feed my kid, how to save money at the grocery store, how to prep meals when it's a busy week, life stress, right? Things that are, my husband lost his job. Now what do we do? My wife is struggling with whatever, right? Everything that we deal with on a personal basis. And even the cat tax was funny, right? I think a lot of people have always thought that Chinese are like they eat strange food and they might eat dogs and stuff. And then it's like, nope, show us your cat, otherwise you're not accepted on this app. Show us your pet, otherwise you're not accepted on this app. And just stuff like that where it's like, they love their pets. They're human. And it's very easy to kind of, with the media, get caught up in the fact that it's always like the others. And so I think this was a really interesting experiment to have that person-to-person interaction, to where Americans in the United States and Chinese actually start to see the problems of the other country at a personal level, not at an economic level, not at a military level, not at a higher level, but just literally at a level of human everyday life. And I think that's really important. And the more that we can have of that moving forward with all countries, not just China and the United States, but literally all countries, because it is easy to say, they're immigrants, or they're this, or they're that, and to segregate them into a bubble that fits with your worldview, and then you can disregard an entire group of people because the media said something and you agree with it, and so therefore they're bad. I don't know. What did you guys think about this experiment? I wish it would have lasted longer, but obviously TikTok is back, and I'm from what I've seen, most people have gone back to TikTok, and it makes sense. It's an easier app to understand and use, but it was really fascinating to me to see that little blip, and that little blip of humanity where people were like, they're just human, which is exactly how we should be interacting. We're just humans. We all have the same problems. We have all the same aspirations and dreams, and the more that we can focus on that, the more we can move forward, because then it's not this enemy. It's, it's my neighbor. It's my friend. And I think that's super important. What do you guys think about it? Was it interesting to you? Do you hope that this type of stuff can continue? I'm hoping that China will create a new app where they let a bunch of Chinese people on, and then try and attract a bunch of people from the US and make an app specifically for it. Because this is clearly, Red Note is clearly a Chinese app. It's been around for a while, and it's completely designed for the Chinese audience. So I think the US users will find it less interesting over time, especially when they can go back to what they were used to. But what are your guys' thoughts? Leave a comment below, because I think it was interesting to see, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. Do you think we're all just people and we all have the same or very similar dreams and aspirations? Or do you think there really is a difference between, nations and the people of the nations? Leave a comment.